What's up, guys, and welcome to episode 9 of Paranormal Axetivities with your host, Ben Axe. Have a great show lined up for you today, all about haunted houses. And, I've talked about my belief, I think, a couple of times about haunted houses in the past. I don't necessarily believe that spirits are attached to a house or trapped in a house, I should say. To get into this a little bit further, I have special guest host or special guest of the night, Phil Sams from the Ghosts in the Night podcast. I was on his show a few weeks ago now, and he was kind enough to join me for my show here in just a few minutes. But before that, I know what you're all wanting. I know what you're all thinking. I know what you're all needing. And that is the paranormal activity of the week. And I do have one. It's not super sexy, I guess, if that makes sense. I think I kind of bragged a little bit too much before when I said that there's so much activity that I could do one a week. So far, so good, but it's definitely getting lighter. And I actually forgot to whip out my EMF meter here for this show. So even if there is some lighting up, I'm not going to see it. But I'm already in this far, minute and a half in. I'm not going to stop now. But my activity of the week, it was kind of strange. It was just a couple nights ago, and I woke up, and I got up, and so I woke up in the middle of the night, and I need to go to the restroom, like you do, and as I got out of bed, I started walking, towards the hallway, and the bathroom is on the right. And as I walked towards the bathroom, still in the bedroom, the way it's set up, it's just the bedroom, the hallway, and then as soon as you turn right is the bathroom, very close to each other, right next to each other. And as soon as I got close to the hallway, again, we have all wood floors. As soon as I got close to the hallway, I heard a thud, it sounded like my cat. My cat likes to jump on our sink. I've made the mistake of giving her water out of the faucet in the past when I've been a little inebriated, and now she thinks she needs sink water. And So sometimes she'll just sit on our sink and wait for me to get in there because apparently she thinks I drink all the time, which might be a little too true, I guess. But so I thought it was her. It was very loud. It was very distinct, and I thought that it was my cat who had got up in the middle of the night or heard me waking up and was like, oh, he's going to get up and give me sink water. That's what I thought. And I walked into the bathroom, and she was not there. It was kind of surreal, I thought, because I really, really thought that it was the cat on the sink, and then she jumped down onto the floor, and it wasn't. It was a very loud noise. It was very, like I said, very distinct. It wasn't just, me walking on the wood floor creaking. I'm going to mention later in this show, and I mentioned in the past, I know what walking on wood floors sound like compared to, thuds. And I've heard my cat jump off that counter several times over the past year and a half that I've lived in this house. And as soon as I realized it wasn't her, I was like, holy shit. So I just realized she wasn't there. So I'm back in the bedroom real quick, and there she was on the bed, sleeping next to my wife's head, basically, in a deep sleep. It definitely wasn't her. There was even time for her to jump down, run past me, jump on the bed she was sleeping. So I'm not really sure what that thud was, but then I realized I have to go downstairs and run the dryer because I had some clothes in there and they didn't get necessarily dry, and because I overloaded it. So I just went down there to check on it, make sure my clothes are ready for the morning, and then I looked at the clock and it was 3:33 a.m. That part probably has nothing to do with anything, but my immediate reaction was, 3:33, that's half of 666, right? Hey, that's math. That's nothing. It's just a number, but it's kind of coincidental, I guess, when you look at it that way. But that thud was definitely legit, and I definitely got that feeling in my stomach around that same time. So not the sexiest of the stories. Definitely not as cool as the EMF meters lighting up and whispering in my ears and then that kind of stuff. But that thud was definitely there, and I'm not sure. I can't say for a fact it was a paranormal activity, but to me, it felt like it was an activity of the week worthy. So there it is. But I think we got Phil here on the line, so let's go ahead and get into our conversation about haunted houses. Hey, Phil, how's it going?
It is going great. It is a pleasure to be here with you today.
Awesome. I really appreciate it. I had a blast on your show a few weeks ago, and I'm really honored that you can be on mine now. So,
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure.
yeah, cool. And I hope you're staying safe here. I know last time I was on your show, we were still in this whole quarantine situation, and that a lot has changed. So hopefully you're still staying safe over there.
Yeah, we're staying safe. Just getting a little stir crazy, and especially with as you probably know, recording a podcast, it can be a little dicey sometimes with noise. Because I don't guarantee there won't be some noise coming through. Keeping these kids quiet,
No, I understand. I understand completely.
it can be a chore.
Sure. I don't have kids over here, but I do have a dog that runs around on our wood floors, so you might hear him walking around or panting or something. So I hear you.
Yeah, well, I got 3 dogs in the room with me because the door's shut. If they're out, I care. Matter of fact, I think when we talked, when you were on my show, at one point, the dog tried to get in the door, and I had to let him in.
No, nice.
And so I just bring him in here, and hopefully they won't bark.
Oh, there you go. Well, that works. All right, cool. Yeah, so today, I know when I was on your show, you mentioned that you lived in a bunch of houses with paranormal experiences. And one of the things we talked about was, like, I don't necessarily believe in a haunted house per se. Like, I don't think ghosts are trapped in a house. So I thought it'd be fun to kind of talk about your experiences and, the concept of a haunted house, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
Awesome. So let's let you go ahead and tell your story here, or start with your story. So, like, what was the first house, and how old were you, do you think you were when you experienced your first paranormal experience?
Well, my first paranormal experience, now it's kind of complicated. I was probably 3, maybe 5 years old. So what I'm remembering, I'm not even sure if it's 100% my memory or the story that has been told to me through the years. Really, my mother is the one who would really tell this story better because she was there. It was me and her at the house. Now, just to kind of give not to bore people too much, but I do have to give a little bit of a backstory. My grandfather on my dad's side wasn't necessarily the nicest person in the world to my mother.
Yeah, fair enough.
And he lost his wife when my dad was like 16, so he kind of went on the downhill slide. And like I said earlier, he just wasn't that nice of a man to my mother. My mother got pregnant and had a son. Would have been my brother, would have been my older brother, and he did not make it. He passed away 7-10 days after his birth. Apparently, that shook my grandfather really hard, and it kind of started to change his life around. He kind of realized how he was, or how he was being. And when my mother got pregnant with me, he really was there for my mother. He life around to a certain extent, and unfortunately he passed away shortly before I was born. Well, there goes those dogs.
Nice. That's the ghost that's stirring him up.
Okay, he passed away shortly before those dogs. Now I even said dogs. I am losing it now. He passed away shortly before I was born, and apparently I've been told he really looked forward to my birth. So to kind of condense the story a little bit, we lived when I was first born, or shortly after I was born, we lived in his house. And and my bedroom was actually his bedroom. So one day I was sitting there, playing in my room, doing what 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds do, and I came out. This is really, I'm telling it from my mother's side. My mother said I came out and said, and she asked me a question. She goes, "Who are you talking to in there?" And I said, "A man, basically. I'm talking to a man." And she goes, "Who is this man?" She says, "My grandfather." And the relationship, or lack there, or not really lack thereof, but my mother still was a little tentative about him because of all of the stuff that had happened in the past. So we didn't keep his picture out. There was nothing to really show him, or there was no way I could have actually known him. So my mother, when I said this, went and got a photo album and opened it up, said, "Did you see somebody that's in this photo album?" And I went through it and picked out this guy. I said, "That's who I was talking to," and it was my grandfather.
Oh, wow.
So Hold on, man. Let me.
Oh, you're
I'm
fine.
sorry. Let me open this door.
No problem at all.
All right. I'm sorry about that.
No, you're fine.
Hopefully, I'm sure they'll want to come back in, but I'll let the door open. They can come back in.
I understand.
But so that was my first experience. Now, naturally, it freaked my mother out, and as most people would think, we did not stay in that house much longer. We pretty much put it up for sale, and we moved on. Now, the next house next activity or haunted house, I would say, which I use that term, I'm like you, I use that term very loosely, would be a house when I moved to Ohio. I was born in West Virginia. That story took place in West Virginia. We moved to Ohio, bought a house, and maybe 5 or 6 years into it is when I started really noticing some activity. If anybody listens to my podcast, episode number 2 is called Slamming Doors. That whole episode is about an experience I had in that house with doors just starting to slam for no reason. And I was probably 6th, 7th grade, somewhere around that. I was in junior high. But activity was very rampant in that house. That would be probably the most typical haunted house if you think of a haunted house. Noises, shadow figures, it ran the gamut of activity. So, and then the house I just moved out of, we had some activity there as well. I mean, it wasn't, I believe on the episode when you were on my show, I talked about how something pulled me over in bed. I was laying on my side and it just pulled me over to my back.
Oh, yeah.
And that was fairly regular there, doors opening, closing there. And that was really the last house that I lived in was probably, and what was really weird about that is that I was the only person that's ever lived in the house, or my family was the only people that ever lived in that home. Nobody else had ever lived there. It was brand new when we moved in it. And so if it was not a haunted house, if anything, I was haunted or a member of my family was haunted at the time. We
Right.
had some sort of attachment, which is very possible for most haunted houses. It's not really the house or the location. It could be the person is sparking the activity or it's just attached to them.
Absolutely, and that makes sense. And I definitely agree with that, too. It's kind of the same thing. The house that I grew up in, my dad's dad built. And so my dad grew up there with his dad and mom. And then they passed away. And then me and my sisters were born, and we grew up in that same house. And my oldest sister and I both heard, walking a lot of the time, the feeling of being watched all of the time. And just always, hearing noises, not necessarily like knockings on the wall, but just like the little house settling noises that my mom would always say was the cause. And my oldest sister, claims to have seen my dad's mother, who had passed away when he was only 12 or 13. So obviously, none of us knew what she would look like, but she claims that she saw her more than once, and has a few stories that I'm not even sure the details of, to be honest with you.
Right.
But yeah, and the same thing. Well, nobody else lived there but us. So clearly, if it was haunted per se, it would be, my family. And
Right.
I wouldn't think that the house itself was haunted, but just they were there hanging out with us was kind of how I always felt about it.
Right.
And we moved out of that house in 2003, and I'm curious to see what the new family would say about it, if they've had any kind of paranormal experiences or not.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm big on. I think it's the people. It's the area around. Now, I should say this: with a haunted house, if it's more of a residual haunting, yes, I would say that is what I would classify as a haunted house because it's based on the environment of that house. Something dramatic happened in that home, to where something is replaying that scenario or that torture or whatever pain that was caused in the house. It keeps playing in the atmosphere like a tape, like a film, just keeps replaying and replaying. In that respect, I do believe in haunted houses. But for more intelligent hauntings, I believe it's more the people or the general area around it, or something is drawing that spirit or that entity to that location not necessarily the home.
And that makes sense. And here's a question too for you. Again, you probably have more like, and you're like 75 episodes into your show, so you probably have a lot of experience. I know you're an investigator as well. So, like, what do you think can cause a residual haunting? Because that's one thing I hear about a lot here, and that's one thing I have a hard time understanding. I guess like intelligent hauntings, I get, and to my brain it makes sense. But residual, like, what's causing that energy to stick around or linger in that area?
You know, that's the one thing when it comes to the paranormal. I'm a big advocate of nobody knows. We are all guessing here. It's
Sure.
we're noticing what we're observing. We're using some, hopefully in my case, a little bit of intellect and trying to form a hypothesis. Now, when it comes to residual haunting, what causes it? I think a lot of it has to do with tragedy and pain, or something has happened that really makes an imprint. It's almost, I've heard this analogy used, like, say, a nuclear explosion or volcanic. You know how in a big explosion, shadows get cast on the wall from the flash and everything. You've probably seen those back, when, especially in the Cold War era, when everybody was worried about a nuclear holocaust. Something happens and it just flashes there and it imprints that energy onto the environment. And I think that's why you get a lot of, especially if you watch the paranormal shows, they're always at a prison, a hospital, insane asylum, infirmary, or some sort, where there's always a lot of pain, there's always a lot of suffering. Now, over time, I think that suffering and that pain and that torture, or mental torture, or sometimes physical torture, really just, it embeds itself into the atmosphere, and we as people sometimes can actually tune into it like a radio. And that is what that residual haunting is. That is why you might see a lady in white, because if you've followed the paranormal, you've always hear of lady in white walking down the stairs or walking down the hall.
Absolutely.
That might be what it is. It's just ingrained and is just permanently part of the atmosphere, and we sometimes can tune into it, just like the old rabbit ears on the television. When you get them just right, we get a good picture. But I've also heard stories about just over time. I forget where I heard this or who told me the story, but they bought a home and they thought the house was haunted because they'd come in, they'd hear walking down the stairs or down the hallway, and almost like it was going into the kitchen, and doors it sounded like cabinet doors would open and close, and they'd come down, cabinet doors would be open. It was frequent, not on a nightly basis, but that was what they experienced. Now, it turns out when they did some research, basically the woman that lived in the home, who passed away in the home, that was pretty much her routine.
Oh, wow.
And she would always get up every morning and, which most people do, get up, either go make coffee or go get something to drink. It was following that person's path every morning. And you could set your watch by it. And like they'd open the counter to get the coffee or whatever out, and that was what was happening. So now, was that a residual haunting, or was that, an intelligent haunting? That the spirit of that lady just continuing to do that day in, day out, like she had her entire life. That's kind of where it gets tricky, and that's where I don't know, honestly. But it could go either way. I think it's very possible that the environment around that home was so used to that happening, it was just replaying it, and not necessarily an intelligent haunting. But I can't say either way.
Oh, sure. I mean, like you said, this is all just, we're trying to figure it out. I mean, obviously, there's no book you can read that's, that tells you exactly what's what here, like a science book. But that's interesting. I mean, absolutely, we all have our routines. I do that every morning. I get up, go downstairs, make coffee at the same time pretty much every day, especially during the week. So, yeah, I can understand how that could be like a lingering energy once it gets put into the air, I guess, for years and years.
Yeah, but I mean, most of the time people think of residual hauntings. I firmly believe it's a lot to have, and that is why It's a lot has to do with the pain, the suffering of the people or the person in an environment. And I can't stress enough, that is why you always hear about Trans-Allegheny in West Virginia and, what is it, Mansfield in Ohio. All these places that are either prisons or hospitals are always considered to be haunted. They have activity. And the one thing they have in common is a lot of suffering. So,
lots of negative energy.
Right, that negative energy just sticks around after the people are long gone.
That makes sense. Actually, you bring that up because I listened to your last episode about shadow people, and when I visited Waverly Hills Sanitarium in Kentucky a while back, that was like one of their biggest things. Everybody sees shadow people there, on top of all their other ghost stories. But the shadow people is like the common core.
Right, and that shadow people is one of those things. It can be either intelligent or, and I don't think I really covered this much in my episode, it can be residual too. It could be some sort of residual replaying as well. It doesn't, people say shadow figures, they automatically jump to, evil demons trying to hold you down and, make you do things you don't want to do. That's not always the case. I'm sure that might be some of it, but that's not always the case. I think it can be just a residual haunting at times. That's why you see it out of the corner of your eye. And when it comes to shadow figures, a lot of people say they act timid, they act shy, almost like they don't want, like a little kid, if you see a little kid, they'll kind of look and then run away. That's how shadow people act from time to time. But that just could be because we're catching it out of the corner of our eye and we're just catching that replay. It doesn't mean it's an intelligent haunting.
That's true. And one thing that I remember the tour guide talking about the shadow people in that location is one of the things that he claimed, again, nobody really knows anything, but he claims that everybody sees the shadow people in that facility because it requires a low amount of energy to be created. So compared to a solid ghost that you see walking down the hallway to shadow people, the shadow people are going to be more popular because, or more common, I guess, because it requires less energy.
Right. I mean, and there's one aspect of this that a lot of people need to really think about, and I'll use Waverly as an example. I was speaking to somebody, it's been a couple of years ago, maybe last year. That person, had knowledge of Waverly, and he remembered a time where there was no activity at Waverly. It was not considered a haunted location. And I think this is why energy plays so much into the paranormal. When our brains, we can look at something and say, ooh, that's a haunted house. Everybody sees the stereotypical haunted house, boarded up windows, and it just looks creepy. And when you project that energy of that place being haunted, you can actually bring on that energy itself, just like we talked about when you came on my podcast, the paranormal attraction. Your energy can make that place haunted. I'm not saying Waverly doesn't have activity now or it's not haunted. People have experienced things for, a few years there. But did those people, was that activity there, or did people look at it and say, ooh, that's a creepy old hospital, and that is what drew those entities or spirits in, or did it just magnify what was there to come up even more? These are the questions we have to ask.
Absolutely, it makes a lot of sense if you think about that building specifically. Every night, every day of the year almost, you have people in there with spirit boxes and trying to talk to ghosts and wanting to see a ghost and using EVP, whatever. So, I mean, like you talked about that traction, it's going to definitely show up if there are people there ready to talk, whether they're from Waverly or not. That's a good point.
Right. And, and we have to be, as people who are interested in the paranormal, we have to be very careful about our own biases, our own confirmation bias. Just because something looks scary doesn't mean there's something there. And our brains can play tricks on us. And deciphering what is actually paranormal and what is actually our brains just telling us we're seeing something or we're experiencing something is very tricky. And you have to walk a fine line and be able to, and for even the most seasoned investigator, it's hard to decipher which one is which sometimes.
Absolutely. And one of those things, too, I know a lot of people claim, if they're in a haunted house or haunted house, they see something here or they hear a noise or whatever. But when you're in that kind of environment, you're going to be a little bit more hypersensitive to things. And other times you hear that same noise, but when you think about it, well, now you're thinking about it. When you're watching a scary movie, for example, you're heightened with those senses because you're on the edge of your seat.
Right, and that's a double-edged sword. There is a misconception that activity only happens at night. Activity happens 24 hours a day. The spirit world is not on doesn't punch a time clock. But we experience more things at night because most often we are in the dark. And when one sense drops off, if I say our sense of sight drops off, our other senses enhance to make up the difference. And that is why I like to investigate in the dark, because my hearing sucks now anyway, but in the dark it seems to get a little bit better. And you can investigate with the lights on or in broad daylight, but it's more visual, because that is what you're predominantly seeing is visual. Sometimes your hearing and your other senses slack off a little bit. So you don't have to investigate at night, but I just like investigating at night because my other senses, and it's easier to be in tune with the environment on a non-visual basis.
No, that's a good point. That makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. Yeah, and you talk about the daytime hauntings and stuff too. As a matter of fact, some of my best haunting experiences happened in the morning when it was daylight. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah, that's pretty cool. So, quick question here. Back on your first haunting, when you were 6 years old, I believe, and you pointed out your grandfather in that picture, and you moved shortly after that. Did you guys move because of that instance?
The story I can't say what I'm just going by hearsay now from what I've been told. Pretty much, that's it freaked my mother out, and so she said, "Okay, let's kind of get out of here."
No.
And my mother and my family has always been very open to the paranormal. In my age group, the paranormal, it wasn't always Ghost Adventures, Ghost Hunters on television. There was a time in my, even up into my high school years, the early 90s and late 80s, that you just didn't talk about this kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
If you mention something like this, unless two people experience the same thing, then you could talk about it. But if there's no way in hell I would have started a podcast, or I'm sure you would have started a podcast back in the late 80s.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because we would have been laughed if you weren't like Leonard Nimoy in search of, they didn't want to have nothing to do with it. People gave you a weird look. They thought you were crazy. To where now, and that is, I crack on Ghost Adventures a lot on my podcast and my real life. But I do have to give them and Ghost Hunters credit, because they have brought it mainstream a little bit and have opened up the doors and enabled people like me and yourself to actually talk about it. And hopefully one day, I think science is coming around to accepting the paranormal a little bit more than, or at least looking into the paranormal, that maybe there's something going on here and people are experiencing something. What it is, we don't know, and how they're experiencing, we don't know. But I do think these shows, as much as I hate them and crack jokes about them, they have opened the door, and hopefully the more eyes we have on this situation, the better chance we have of getting some light shed on what's actually going on and what people are experiencing.
Yep, that's a great point. And so you say that, I was actually having a Zoom conference call the other day with a couple of my buddies from my hometown, because we can't, social distancing, we can't hang out in person now. And they're kind of talking about the show a little bit, and they were like, "Yeah, so when you talk about how you see these crazy people, you're one of them now with that show." Right. Like, well, fair enough.
Right. People are always going to be judgmental no matter what, but it's a little easier now than, and a little bit more mainstream now. So.
Oh, absolutely. It's kind of like how the Big Bang Theory kind of made people who like comic books a cool thing. That's what they said. But yeah, that's cool. So when it comes down to the haunted houses per se, so is your kind of frame of thought that either the people or there's something attached to the house, not the actual house itself, like maybe an item inside the house?
It's, if I had to guess 100% and tell you what I honestly believe, I would say it could be anything, but I always lean towards the fact that it could be the general environment of the area. If you live near, say, an old Indian burial ground, I think the whole neighborhood might have some activity, but some people just aren't picking it up on it.
I gotcha.
I'm sure I'm not a big buyer. I don't buy into, haunted objects as much as most people. I'm sure some energy can get attached to a doll or a mirror or whatever, but I think it's more a product of the environment and what has happened in that area. And when something traumatic or something happens in an area that imprints on the surrounding area, just because it's there doesn't mean everybody's going to pick up on it. We are all different. We all sense different things. We are all open to more or to different things. Not everybody is. I'm more likely to experience activity than just some random person who is a complete atheist, doesn't believe in any kind of afterlife or spirit world. I'm going to experience something before that person because not that I'm looking for it, but I'm more open to it.
Right. Oh, yeah, that's definitely a part of it. Having a block on yourself can, for sure. Yep.
Now, when it comes to a haunted house, I'm not saying a house is never haunted. I think probably if I had to say with 100% certainty or which way I lean the most is the spirit world is actually all around us. We are interacting with it daily, whether we're at home, at the gas station, or at the bank. The spirit world is laid over top of us. It's not some distant, far-off place. It's just a different realm that if you walk through a door, you actually could walk into it. We just don't experience it. We aren't in tune to it. We don't vibrate on the same frequency as it in most cases, or some people don't. Now, when you talk about psychic mediums, they might be able to tune into that. That is why they can be anywhere and get some kind of reading, or they can sense something. I think it's all around us, so I think the whole world is haunted, just not a house.
I absolutely agree with that. And I guess one of the things that kind of brought this on was, I don't know if you ever watched the show American Horror Story or not, but I was into it back in the day. And in the first season, one of the characters, she dies from whatever, and then when she finds out that she's a ghost, she's running out the door, and then she's back in the house against her will. And
right.
That's just something I was like, if ghosts are real, I don't think that's how it would be,
Right.
So as I've kind of drag that on, and when we talked, you mentioned that you kind of have the same idea that it's not just, oh, this house is haunted, here's a ghost. It's obviously more detailed than that. So absolutely.
Right. I mean, and there's so many different facets to this. There's so many different possibilities, and like we talked about, I talked about earlier, it could be the people, it could be you or me, or you brought it in, not as an attachment. You're just open to it. And so, like we talked about when you came on my show, you're a beacon for it, and you project this light, and they are drawn to you. So they see that you're open. They see that you believe, or you might have some sort of connection to the other realm, and they just come to you, and that's what sparks the activity in the house. So it's super complex, and nobody has the answers.
Nope, absolutely. You might find this interesting. I have how those the K2 EMF meters that people have. We have one here, and I did an episode with my wife the other day, and we believe that she's absolutely that kind of light. And when she was sitting here talking to me, it just lit up like I've never seen light up before. It was pretty wild. I wish I would have taken a picture of it. I just didn't think about it because of her story that she was telling was kind of wild. So I was distracted. But yeah. So like when it comes to meeting those people, I think that's definitely a thing. And I've never seen a meter light up that much. Even with when I put it around electronics that make it light up, it lit up.
Right. I mean, that's those are moments where when something like that happens. When something like that happens to me, that is when you go into you kind of got to look around and try to figure out what's going on. Was this caused naturally, or was there something interacting with us, or whatever? You have to go into investigation mode and try to figure out what's going on.
Yep, absolutely. And I wrote down the times, and I was talking to her, but I just got busy, and I actually haven't went back and listened to the audio of that yet. But I do have the times written down to know when to look, or listen, I should say. But cool. So I really appreciate you being on the show. I think I can go ahead and wrap it up here. I know we can find your podcast, Ghost in the Night. You're on like most of the platforms, correct? Like Spotify, Apple. Where can we find you at?
Yeah, it's Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, whatever they're called now. I think whatever Google Play, whatever they're called now.
I know they're all changing.
They changed their name. Podbean, Stitcher, pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast, it is there, or the Libsyn feed itself. And I always post. They're on YouTube as well in some form, some video form. So at Ghost in the Night on YouTube, you can catch all the podcasts there.
Awesome. Also, be sure to check out ghostinthenightpodcast.com. You have a website, so that's pretty cool. I've yet to have a website, so
yeah.
Very good deal. And then follow you on Twitter at @night_ghost, correct?
That is it. And Ghost in the Night Podcast on Facebook as well. We do have a little bit of a group there. I don't spend a lot of time on Facebook. I'm more of a Twitter guy anyway.
That's fair. Yeah, same here. I try to start a Facebook group. I'm just not. I don't have that dedication, I guess. It's like I have that page, and that's about it.
Yeah, I don't have that kind of time between the podcast, my regular job, and Twitter. It's things get missed. So I kind of got to narrow things down a little bit.
Yep, I understand completely. Yeah, so guys, be sure to check out Phil's show, Ghost in the Night. I listened to a few episodes. I'm going to keep listening to it. It's pretty entertaining and educational, which I really enjoy. It's not just somebody telling ghost stories. There's a lot more to it than that. So it's a very good show. I appreciate you being on this show. It was a great time and a great pleasure.
All right, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. You have a great day.
You too.
And again, thanks again, Phil, for being on the show. I had a great time. And for you guys out there listening, if you haven't listened to the Ghost in the Night podcast, definitely check it out. It's available wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, all of those platforms. He also has a YouTube show on YouTube called Ghost in the Night. And definitely check out the ghostinthenight.podcast.com. So yeah, definitely some good stuff there. I really enjoyed the show today. And then, with the ghosts, with the hauntings, like, what do you guys think? If you have an idea, or if you have an opinion, or if you have any stories regarding haunted houses specifically, like, what's your opinion on what a haunted house is? I guess that's what I kind of want to know. I just have a hard time believing that people or ghosts or spirits are trapped in a house. Obviously they could want to be there, and that makes sense. But again, that doesn't mean the house is haunted. It just means the spirit is choosing to stay there, right? I don't know. That's my opinion. I have no idea, though. I don't really know anything. And that's why we're doing the show. So email me at what is my email address? paranormalaxepodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Paranormal Axetivities, or actually it's at Axetivities. My name is Paranormal Axetivities. And there's a website coming soon. I'm working on it. I'm not good at it, so you have to bear with me, but it is coming. I'm working on that one and my wrestling podcast one. If you are a fan of pro wrestling, I highly recommend the regularly scheduled hostilities podcast. You can follow us at RSH Wrestling or me at Ben Lovin. And I think that's all I have for you. So tell your friends, tell your family, and let's just keep learning about the paranormal together.